Hello and welcome to the Federal. I am Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, and you are watching our new program, Off the Beaten Track, in which we talk about the backstory of the headlines. It really is not a matter of just now, actually. The issue of federalism is all the time in headlines in India, especially in the last few years. Very recently, again, in the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Independence Day speech, he once again referred to competitive cooperative federalism, something that he had not been mentioning for a couple of years at least. Of course, cooperative federalism was one of the promises on the basis of which he got the mandate in 2014. But the jury is still out as to whether there has been any cooperative federalism or has it been more on coercive federalism on those lines. Now, I'm going to be speaking to Professor Balveer Arora, who is one of the foremost political scientists of India, someone who has possibly worked on the issue of federalism for the past half a century, if I can actually say so. He started teaching political science at the Jawaharlal Nehru University way back in the early 70s and was serving there till the time he retired, about a decade or maybe a few more years prior to that, I think 2010, if I am correct. Professor Balveer Arora is also currently the chairman of the Center for Multi-Level Federalism, which is a part of the Institute of Social Sciences. While being in JNU, he was the former rector and also served as the pro-vice chancellor. So, Professor Arora, welcome to this program and thank you very much for giving us time to discuss an issue which is of such crucial importance to India. I was just while preparing for this program, I came across several of your articles which you have written on federalism. I found this very interesting small little piece which you wrote several years back, which was published in the Hindu newspaper. It talked about, this is at least about 6 years ago, I think 2016. The headline was The Distant Goal of Cooperative Federalism. And you wrote that for working India's federal system, one has to go beyond brute parliamentary majorities and grapple with multi-level government opposition matrix. Nothing really seems to have changed much. Very recently, as I said in the introduction, competitive cooperative federalism is back again. The Prime Minister said that there should be competition for development also. Now, federalism, to a layman like me, operates at various levels. It operates at the political level, it operates at the fiscal level, and it operates at the administrative level. Now, when I would like to ask you right at the onset that how are you seeing federalism, both in terms of as an idea in India and in terms of practice, what are the real contemporary challenges of federalism in the country at the moment?
Thank you, Nilanjan, for inviting me to your program. And I think, as you have rightly pointed out in your introduction, this term of cooperative federalism, we'll talk about that first,
yes.
Was part of the promise of the manifesto in 2014. And the article that you refer to in the Hindu was published 1 year later when I was asked to assess how much progress had been made on this front and what one could look forward to. So I would like to go back to that period and that mood and those promises, because when you start off on a mandate, you lay out a program. This is 8 years ago, 2014, we are in 2022, and now we are talking of an agenda for the next 5-10 years, we don't know. This period of 8 years is a long enough period to translate electoral rhetoric and electoral promises into something more tangible, something that we can grapple with and we can say, yes, in 8 years, this has been the record, this has been the achievement, and we can then go on to look at the next steps. If you recall, in 2014, there was this, from the ramparts of the Red Fort, this stupendous announcement of the abolition of the Planning Commission.
That's right.
There again, there was an expression of intention that things were going to change. What was this expectation? The expectation was that here, after a long time, and in fact, it hasn't been so frequent in the past, a chief minister with experience from the other end, or the short end of the stick of the federal bargain, was coming to Delhi and had his own perspectives, his own experiences. And so we at once said, this abolition of the Planning Commission reflects the fact that it was high-handed, it was not treating chief ministers with due respect. And so here comes the Gujarat chief minister, who with one fell swoop abolishes.
I'd just like to, add to what you are saying. I had in fact anticipated that you would be referring to the fact that Mr. Narendra Modi, has been the first real chief minister with a very popular mandate to become the prime minister of the country. Now, some of the statements that he made over the years before he became the prime minister, while being the chief minister, he used to be at loggerheads with the UPA government, if you might remember. He, in fact, said, that the UPA is destroying the federal structure for their self-interest. That was one of the charges that he made. He said that sometimes there is debate whether the central government of the state should be more powerful. If the pillars are not strong, then how would the center be strong? If you want a strong nation, then you need to strengthen states. Further, he said that he talked about the Keshavananda Bharati case, which is going to actually enter its 50th year from October onwards. In October 1972, hearings started on this very important constitutional matter. And then eventually they came out in early 1973, they came out with a judgment. So we are going to be talking a lot about Keshavananda Bharati case, 50 years. He had referred to that also and said that even the Indian Parliament cannot change the soul of the constitution wedded to the federal structure. Now, after having taken such a position, it just appears that this government has also behaved like a lot of previous governments, of not wanting to give any autonomy and any real power to the states.
Yes, I think the quotations that you have given indicated and raised hopes. Let me be very frank, raised hopes that here was a new perspective on federalism, and that it would be more receptive to the basic essence of federalism, which is dialogue and compromise between the union and the states, never forgetting for one moment that India is a union of states. Now, this promise,
union of states, again, I'll interrupt, union of states, there was a statement made by Rahul Gandhi just in February, where he referred to India as a union of states, and he was ripped apart by the shouting brigade of the ruling party without anybody really understanding.
No, but it is.
He was just quoting.
I'm not citing
the Constitution.
Exactly. I'm not citing any political figure on this. I am citing the Constitution, because
that's exactly.
I think it is important to come back to basics and remember that this union of states can only work in the spirit of the respect of the federal principle. Now,
right.
It's one thing to talk about the basic structure and federalism, its institutions and structures being a part of the basic structure. We can talk about that, whether states can be abolished at will and so on. But I would like to focus on the promise and the performance, the reality of what we have seen in the last 8 years. And I think here I would raise two issues and we can discuss this. One is, I would say that there has been an enormous dialogue deficit between the center and the states. A dialogue deficit where existing fora of interaction, intergovernmental interaction between the center and the states were not activated or were infrequently convened, and the new ones that were promised, there are 2 or 3 new ones that have come up. One is the Niti Ayog's council, which more or less replaces the National Development Council. The other is a very new initiative, which is the GST Council, which never existed before. So now you have these fora. The point I'm making is that every prime minister is entitled to his style of functioning. The fact that the prime minister is not given to interacting with the press has been noted, not just in India, but globally, that he doesn't like a press conference. But federalism, which means talking to your own states, that requires a certain kind of dialogue. And this, there was initially something called Team India. Then, unfortunately, COVID with its online meetings aggravated the issue. And you had these meetings where chief ministers complained that they were given 10 minutes. Some of them were not even allowed to speak. So I'm underscoring the first point that I would like to raise here is this dialogue deficit, this deficit of federal dialogue, where you need to constantly be in communication, in exchange with your counterparts. So that is one thing. The other thing that I picked up from what you said is that federalism involves not just legal, administrative, financial issues. It is also a social compact, which is reflected in federal institutions. The social compact requires the respect of popular majorities, popular mandates, wherever in the union they might have been expressed. And therefore, I would stress this, the equality of mandates. If Parliament has gives a mandate, or the people give a mandate to a party in Parliament to do certain things within the federal structure, it is equally important to remember that the people of the states have given equally strong democratic mandates.
And that should be respected.
And those are on par, I would say, because federalism is self-rule and shared rule. So you have to share sovereignty to the extent that it has been divided between the center and the states, and they have their own carved out area of competence and of responsibility, and the rightful claim to exercise power within the framework of the Constitution.
Right. You have actually put it very succinctly, I would say. Now, there is a history in India of center-state relations being problematic. Way back in 1983, when Indira Gandhi had once again got a majority after her defeat between 77 and 80. Because of the demands being made by several states, a commission was appointed, Justice R.S. Sarkaria Commission, Initially, especially in the early years of while being in this profession, Sarkaria Commission used to be talked about, its recommendations, huge list of recommendations, 250. We'll possibly end up discussing Sarkaria Commission report for 10 hours if we really start talking about it. But it's completely fallen off the national political discourse. The entire idea that it needs to be, certain key issues need to be flagged. Now, one of the core issues which was talked about in the 70s and in the 80s was about the way of appointing governors and the role of the governor. I'm referring to it because very recently the former governor of West Bengal is now the Vice President of India. At the time when he was nominated to be the candidate of the ruling alliance, to be the vice presidential candidate, many commentators had said that this is possibly he's been chosen because of having given a tough time. In fact, that was exactly one of the phrases which was used to the democratically elected government of West Bengal. Now, to what extent does the governor, actually become an agent of the center and prevents the state governments from being able to function in an autonomous manner using all the rights that it has? States also have this constant problem. You had also referred to the GST Council of unequal distribution and always being short of funds that not being given adequately by the center. I would like you to shed some thoughts on these issues.
Okay, I think let us be fair to Justice R.S. Sarkaria and the report that he produced.
Yes.
It was a very sound piece of work.
Very sound.
And the number of recommendations, some of them have crept into political practice through the legal route, in the sense that if you notice the sharp fall in the imposition of president's rule.
Exactly.
Yes, that was taken up by the Supreme Court under Bommai, and the Bommai judgment reproduces practically a texto what Sarkaria has suggested. You are referring to another set of recommendations, because these recommendations were examined for years in the Interstate Council. Some were accepted silently, those that were not very controversial. But this big chunk concerning the role of the governor
and also the way of selecting
the kind of person, the qualifications, and so on. Sarkaria went into great depth on this issue and made some very valid and very valuable recommendations. What has happened is that the office of the governor, which Justice Sarkaria wanted to elevate to a position of sage. This is Soli Sorabji who wrote governor, sage, or saboteur. Now, the saboteur part, when you are using the office of the governor to sabotage the democratic mandate that has been given to the people, to an elected state government, that was never part of the constitutional scheme. That is a distortion and a perversion. Now, the fact that Sarkaria Commission's recommendations didn't find favor with the government was that instrumentalization of any office, and we are talking about governors, we can talk about election commissions, we can talk about CAGs, we can talk about a whole host of institutions who are intended to be autonomous and independent and function within the constitutional framework that is spelled out for them. This is a sad story, and I would end it by saying that the office of the governor has been debased and devalued. I think there is no one who speaks in defense. There may be an occasional governor here and there who's conscientiously doing his duty, but by and large, they are perceived as tools, as instruments to carry out the center's bidding. So that agent of the center, which was the ambiguity between the 35 Act and the 50 Constitution, that has unfortunately, it is political practices which are to blame. I don't think Justice Sarkaria left any stone unturned in trying to reform the office.
Right. But the office of the governor has always been controversial, at least for the last 40 years I have seen while being a journalist that the office of the governor has always been used by the center to leverage the state government. And there have been various Supreme Court judgment also on it. But, it's not that when we talk about it at the moment, I just want to make it clear that we are not talking about that this is a problem which has crept in only in the last 8 years after 2014, that this is a problem which pre-existed even Mr. Modi becoming the Prime Minister of India. And in fact, he had, as you had rightly pointed out in the beginning, said that he had raised hope that he is going to address a lot of these issues, because for 13 years he had been, what he used to say, that I have been on the receiving side of the center's brunt. That is exactly
Right.
he.
Yeah,
I remember,
I don't want to
said so.
lay this at the door of Mr.
That's right.
Modi, because I think if we come back to the theme that you started, I would like to come back to that as to what has been the record in federalism on the federal front during the last 8 years, because the governor's office, as you yourself said, is as old as the Sarkaria Commission. So, I mean, it's not something that has come recently. Now, I would like to take up the second adjective that Mr. Modi used, which is competitive federalism.
Yes.
He strung these two together.
Yes.
And it is this stringing together that I find problematic, but maybe you would like to say something.
No, I just wanted to just point out that I was actually looking at the past record of this government and the kind of phrases which Mr. Modi has used, because I was writing an article on Mr. Modi's Independence Day speech. So I wanted to cross-check that whether he has used this phrase previously or not. And I found, that he had used it, but in the last 2 or 3 years, the usage had virtually disappeared. And it was presented in this speech as if that he was coming out with a fresh idea. We have pointed out, in fact, in the article, that this speech was very conspicuous in the dearth of new ideas. But even competitive cooperative federalism is not really a new idea. But nonetheless, it is
not.
being repackaged.
It's not a new idea. I fully agree with you. I would like to put these two ideas together, because we have talked a lot about cooperative federalism.
Right.
And that competitive federalism has been bobbing up and down in the public discourse for the last 8 years. I mean, when the Planning Commission was abolished, the Niti Aayog was one of the major propagators of this idea, with its rankings and its attempts to stimulate competition, so-called between the states. Yes. Now, the point, Nilanjan, that I would like to make here is that cooperative federalism belongs to the domain of a kind of democracy, a federal democracy with its own sets of rules and procedures and guidelines, and the emphasis on dialogue, on cooperation is one set. Competitive federalism derives its inspiration from a totally different set of ideas of a neoliberal market economy driven system. It's more discussing the way in which states will conduct themselves, and you have this mistaken notion that the states should not be giving out what was derisively called rivalries or freebies. This was the idea that the states are bound by a certain fiscal discipline and economic framework. Now that has to be sorted out, that has to be discussed, that is not something that you can impose. For two reasons, Nilanjan, I would emphasize this. One is that in a union of unequal states, to put them all on par and expect them to perform,
to compete with each other.
Yeah, to compete with each other. Some of them have legs tied, some of them are burdened by all sorts of problems. So unless you incentivize the states which are falling back to and giving them the wherewithal to be able to compete, you are making competition between unequals, and that is not something. The second thing, and I'll be brief on this, the second thing is that the states require asymmetrical arrangements. You can't have a one-size-fits-all formula where you say this is a competitive federalism and everyone compete and the devil take the hindmost. So I think there is something wrong with this formulation, and it's at loggerheads with the principle of asymmetrical cooperative federalism.
One last question, Professor Arora, before we wind up this discussion. We are already in 2022. Now, as you know that in 2024, in less than 2 years, we will be having the parliamentary elections. So the election season, if I may actually put it that way, would actually begin by the third quarter of 2023, which is possibly just about 13 or 14 months away. Given that competition, political competition is going to rise the moment election season sets in, and maybe even a few months prior to that. We also have very important elections in the state of Gujarat, where the Prime Minister has very high stakes later this month, and again through various states in 2023. So what kind of a roadmap are you seeing for the health of federalism as far as you understand that? Do you see things getting any better, or are you actually looking at it, being a constant tussle between center and state, each one trying to score political brownie points against one another?
Yes, viewing this as a conflictual relationship between the center and the states does not serve the Indian Union or the Indian people. I think they have to figure out a modus vivendi of working together instead of undercutting democratically elected government. So that is the first point I would make, is that this trend towards nullifying the popular mandate that is given to states through, how should I put it, the various ways of dubious legality. If that is the way in which the 24 Lok Sabha elections are going to be approached, what it means is that you are bit by bit, element by element, state by state, going to try and dismantle the opposition so that there's no opposition left in the 24 election. Dismantle not just through the electoral process, but as you rightly said, through the use of the office of governor, through the use of other inducements, which I don't want to go into, but I think that's for the judiciary also to think whether it should exclude itself totally from this. Because if you can intervene on freebies, you can intervene on freebies given to legislators. I think they are far more substantial. The point that you are making is that what can we look forward to? I think the coming phase will see a sharpening of the competition between the opposition ruled states and the center. And some ground rules need to be laid down in the sense that the constitutional propriety, constitutional morality, and the respect of what the Prime Minister has proclaimed as cooperative federalism, that demands that you respect opposition, not just in parliament, but where it exists in the federal union. And that right of the opposition to coexist with government is the basic principle of parliamentary democracy, of federal democracy, where the government and opposition are the two pillars on which the whole edifice functions. So I think that is something that we need to watch out for, the respect of democratic mandates.
I think that's very well put, and thank you very much, Professor Balveer Arora, for joining me on this program. Last word, that we keep on talking about diversity of India. India is also politically extremely diverse, as you pointed out. So I think it's high time for us to expect the political leaders, especially those who are in power at the center, to respect the political diversity of this country also. And thank you very much once again, Professor Arora, for being part of this program.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more interesting updates.